Okay, we're gonna get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I am Ashley Ferraro. I am the Assistant Director for the Office of Global Learning at FDU, and I would now like to introduce Isabella Bedrosian to introduce our guest speaker. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Isabella. I'm a graphic design major at FDU. I had the pleasure a couple weeks ago of meeting Alyssa in my global issues class. She came and she gave a little presentation. So today I'm going to give you a bit of a background on her, and then Alyssa will take the floor and kind of tell you her story. So just some quick information for you. Alyssa founded and serves as the CEO of Schools for Sustainability. She conceptualized the idea of building an environmentally friendly, sustainable school at the age of 15. She envisioned a world where each human being was empowered through their education while fostering environmental stewardship. Her personal experience overcoming poverty and her time abroad clarified that vision. She interned for a microfinance organization that were working to break the poverty cycle in the slums of India. She taught English at an orphanage in Tanzania and facilitated the establishment of the Women's Witness Protection Program for the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. She earned a BA in political science and graduated magna cum laude from Arcadia University with Phi Alpha Sigma, Phi Kappa Phi, and Phi Beta Delta honors. As the CEO, she assembled a team of 70 volunteers that fundraised, wrote curriculum, built a water purification system, and constructed an aquaponic unit in the Dominican Republic. Currently, she's focusing on bringing sustainable concepts to the Philadelphia area while helping individuals and small businesses become more eco-friendly and save money as a sustainability consultant. Like I said, Alyssa, we spoke a couple weeks back in a presentation that you gave to my class. And kind of before we get into your presentation, I'd love it if you could tell the audience a bit more about your background and how you got where you are today.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Isabella. So as you mentioned, my name is Alyssa, and my background, I am actually from the Bronx, New York, so a local to New York City. And in my time as in high school, my family, we were actually evicted from our home, and I lived in basically the New York City subways. Anyone who is familiar with the 4 train, that was my home for about a year until a couple of my friends noticed my housing insecurity and took me in. It was in that moment that really fostered the idea that I have skills and gifts and talents, even though I'm finding myself in a difficult situation, but I have skills, gifts, and talents to offer the world. And that's when I really started to think about what my passions were and what types of issues I wanted to address moving forward. And fortunately, I had an amazing education. I got a scholarship to go to a blue ribbon school in the Bronx, and my professors were phenomenal, and they really helped me to understand my place in society and how, with my gifts and talents, I can find the intersection between a variety of issues in order to meet them. And the specific issues that I was really interested in addressing were poverty, environmental degradation, and public health issues, as well as educational inequalities. So for a while, it felt like, all these like 4 really major issues, and I oscillated between maybe I should be a teacher and address educational inequalities. Maybe I should be an environmentalist and focus on sustainability issues. Maybe I should become a lawyer and focus on establishing policies that address economic inequalities. And then ultimately, I realized I didn't have to pick one thing because all of these issues affect each other. They intersect, they collide. Not one issue is necessarily more important than the other. And oftentimes, if we just focus on one issue, what we're doing is only addressing the symptoms as opposed to the overall systemic problems. And in that realization was when I basically started school sustainability in order to address those 4 major issues that I was really passionate about.
Wow. So could you tell us a bit more about how the school works and kind of how that operates today?
Definitely. So currently, we focus on the Dominican Republic because it was where we had the most social capital. We had connections with the former president of the Dominican Republic, and we were also able to get land basically for free. He was able to donate land to our organization in kind in exchange of the work that we were going to be doing on behalf of the country. So we started there, and we built a water purification system and an aquaponic system. The reason why we started with those 2 specific projects were because once we established basically a perimeter of where the school was going to be, we conducted community surveys to figure out what our community's needs were before we went in and with like a top-down approach of this is what your community needs. We wanted to really assess what the needs of our surrounding community were and basically meet them where they were at. Upon learning that the main reason specifically little girls weren't able to go to school is because they had to go fetch water for their family, we knew that that was basically the number 1 issue that we needed to address. In doing so and providing clean drinking water to the community, we were able to address a lot of issues. Specifically, people in our community weren't becoming ill because they weren't drinking contaminated water. Help families be able to save money for other things because they didn't have to pay ridiculous medical bills to combat the illnesses that they were enduring because of drinking contaminated water. And then also the girls were able to go back to school because they didn't have to go fetch water miles away. So just by addressing this one issue, we were really able to see how addressing clean drinking water was affecting our community, the members in our community in so many ways. Once we were able to address the clean drinking water issue, we were able to go back kind of to the drawing board and say, okay, so what's next? What is the most pressing issue? And one of the major issues was iron deficiency in our community. And politicians would, during an election campaign, would go and give iron pills to members in the community like, hey, vote for me. But we knew we wanted to develop a more long-term and sustainable solution as opposed to just giving out iron tablets when it was convenient for the advancement, of their political careers. So basically what we worked with another nonprofit called 33 Buckets. I highly recommend them. I'm going to type their name in the chat so you guys can look them up. They are a group of engineers. We collaborated with them to not only build our water purification system, but also to develop a design for our aquaponic unit. And the aquaponic unit, basically, it's a marriage between 2 really cool technologies. It is aquaponics, is basically aquaculture, which is the cultivation of fish, and then hydroponics, which is the cultivation of crops without the presence of soil, which worked for our community because the soil where our community was working had been depleted after years and years and years of growing sugarcane. So all of the nutrients from the soil was depleted because of colonization and slavery and all that good stuff that happened. And so we were able to cultivate food, specifically food that was high in iron and high in protein, through the aquaponic system. And basically the way that it works, to get a little technical here, is the fish feces provides nutrients for the crops, and then the crops purify the fish tank. So it's a closed loop system. It requires very little human intervention. It's really freaking cool. And I even geeked out even more after learning that the indigenous Taino population, which resided in the island of Hispaniola before Christopher Columbus, actually developed aquaponic systems. They had bonucos where they would cultivate fish and crops. And I thought that was so cool because it was just like, wow, not only are we able to address this community's need for iron by growing these high iron foods and also their lack of protein through the cultivation of fish, but we're also bringing back this ancient technology that was wiped out. And it was just like all these levels of healing, and it was just like so exciting, and I can geek out more about that all day, but you know, we can move on to the next one.
Definitely see your passion in the subject. So with that, I'll give you the floor and let you get started with your presentation.
Wonderful. So I created a presentation for my visual learners. I am a visual learner, so I wanted to give some visuals to give a little bit more context to the type of technologies I just briefly mentioned. All right, can everyone see it?
Yes.
Isabella, can you be okay, cool. All right, so again, Alyssa, Ramos, and Morris, Schools for Sustainability. This is our fun little logo. And our mission was basically to establish and operate self-supporting high schools that teach and model proficiency in water remediation, organic food production, renewable energies, and waste management. And I know that a lot of you are studying sustainable development goals, so I'm sure you see some overlap there in terms of the 4 areas that our school was really striving to work toward. And then basically, while the students are learning these 4 subjects, students were learning these 4 areas, they were also achieving a high school diploma and getting basically Common Core standards. And the reason why we chose to focus on Common Core is because there are a lot of students in the Dominican and Haitian community that after getting their high school diploma, they actually want to study in the United States. So we thought that that would be the best way for them to be able to continue their post-secondary schooling in the United States. And some of, again, going back to the 4 main components, water remediation, we did it through basically 4 major ways. We constructed a well within the community, and it was a great first start. It's actually how we found out that the water had been contaminated. There were other existing wells, but due to erosion, the wells had become contaminated. So we were able to actually build the water purification system using the water from the wells. So instead of reinventing the wheel, we were able to leverage the already existing infrastructure. While limited, we were able to leverage the infrastructure that was there. We also built water catchment systems. Basically, it's just a fancy way of saying water storage. But what we did differently is we were able to employ more traditional technologies, more traditional appropriate technologies. Before, these water catchment systems were made out of adobe clay, and the adobe actually kept the water clean because of the minerals in the water, whereas there had been a shift to using plastic, and with the plastic being heated in the intense Caribbean heat, it was actually leaching chemicals into the water. So we were able to teach our community members, hey, go back to the way things used to be, and let's rely on the plastic bins for non-consumption, like washing dishes and taking showers and things like that, because of the chemicals that are leaching into the water from the plastic containers. And then we also began to establish a gray water reuse. So basically water that was used to wash dishes and for bathing was then used for gardening, as opposed to just everything going in one way. We also studied the eco machine. While we didn't get to implement it yet, it's one of our long-term goals. And I'll just talk very briefly about the eco machine. It's built on a campus called the Omega Center. If anyone's like a geek about water, I highly recommend that you visit the Omega Center. They do free tours. It's kind of like in upstate New York. And basically what they have built is a mini biome, and through the use of plants and algae and fungi and bacteria, they're able to actually clean water, which is how nature does it. So this is basically a form of biomimicry that can be implemented on a small or a large scale. So anyone who's interested in learning about water remediation, I definitely recommend that you look up the eco machine. It's a really cool, long-standing way to address a lot of our water issues that are pervasive all over the United States now, but also internationally. And then our second main goal was organic food production. A lot of the members in the community had strayed away from producing their own food because the soil had been so deeply eroded of nutrients. So through the aquaponics system and through employing permaculture principles, we were able to revitalize the soil. And permaculture is a school of thought that's a whole presentation onto itself, but basically it consists of 12 principles that teach us how to be sustainable long-term. Some of those principles include observing before intervening, collecting energy, and basically it was developed in Australia as a way to address sustainable development, but it has since transformed to be more of a way that people should interact with each other. So it's really cool. Another thing you guys should research, I'll pop it in the chat. I'll type in eco machine and permaculture in there as fun things you can all research. And this is a picture of my team. This is the aquaponics system that we built. As you can see, there's a series of tanks that are all connected. It's a closed loop, and one of the tanks houses the fish, another tank houses the crops, and then the tanks in between function as the transition. Okay. And then renewable energy sources. We were planning on building a solar panel field because in the Dominican Republic, they basically get sun 24/7. And then we learned that the government of the Dominican Republic was actually working with the German government to establish a field. So instead of, again, reinventing the wheel, we decided it would be best to collaborate with that already existing project in order to bring technology to our school. And while this is still like underway and going, our goal is basically to train our students on their fields and basically barter. In exchange of our students being able to access their technologies, our students will help maintain the fields. And then last but not least, waste management. So I'm going to talk about two main ways of waste management while there are many. The first is composting. So composting is basically when you take organic matter like your banana peels and your apple cores from your kitchen, and you take your your nitrogen rich material like newspaper or your toilet paper rolls, and you basically wait for nature to do what nature does, and it decomposes it. Ideally, a compost bin is done outside. If it has the appropriate carbon to nitrogen balance, it's not smelly at all. There are lots of other forms of composting like bokashi, which enable you to also compost small bones and like fish bones. That's fun research that I would encourage you all to look into. But the most typical form of composting and waste management that we were beginning to implement at the school is composting, because the sun is a powerful force in the Dominican Republic, And it was a technique that the members in our community were already familiar with. So it didn't necessarily require too much training or intervention. The other system that we were looking into but decided not to employ at this school, but might do so in future schools, is something called the anaerobic digester. I can geek out about this all day. Basically, it's the total opposite of composting. In order to maintain a healthy compost bin, you need oxygen. So anaerobic digestion exists in the presence of no oxygen. So it's entirely closed off. And basically what it does, it creates two major byproducts. One is this, as you'll see in this picture, it's like a sludge material that it's actually really nutrient rich and can be used for like as a fertilizer, but it also produces biogas. So it's a really cool way of using our waste and producing energy that can be used for heating and cooling and cooking. It's a really cool system that has been used overseas and that I'm hoping to see be used in the US more often. So just in summation, our projects were able to promote greater social and civil stability, agricultural optimization. Because of our tropical climate, we were able to improve student engagement. We were able to also create green jobs, water self-sufficiency, and support the rural community. All right, I know that was a lot of information. I want to be conscious of time and give everyone the opportunity to ask any questions. I like having talks that are more interactive than just me talking. So I'm gonna stop sharing. I see. Okay, I'm seeing some chat, so I'm sorry, give me 1 sec while I peep at what's going on in the chat. Sharing your screen. Text. I can share my PowerPoint presentation for anyone who's interested if there are bits of the presentation. You have the floor, Maria.
Oops, sorry.
But when it's done correctly, there's a nonprofit organization in Chicago that has been using anaerobic digestion, and they've been using it to basically make kombucha tea, which is really cool. They've been able to work with engineers and scientists in order to get the right chemical composition so that it's not harmful. I hope that answers your question. I'm personally not a scientist, so all of like the technical stuff, you're gonna have to excuse me. I don't know all of the chemical part. I know what my scientists taught me, and I'm just like, oh, this is so cool. So I hope that answers your question. The next is, let's see. Sorry, as more questions pop in,
Yes, another question.
why did you choose? Do you have a background in science that enabled you to better understand that concept? I'm so glad you asked this question. So my background is not specifically in science. I'm minored in like biology, but not a scientist. What my strength is bringing people together. So basically, after we met with our community members and interviewed the community on what their most pressing needs were, we learned that the number one biggest obstacle was access to clean drinking water. Girls weren't able to go to school because they had to travel miles in order to get access to clean drinking water. And then individuals that didn't travel the miles and the distances were unfortunately drinking contaminated water that resulted in members in the community falling sick and some members in the community passing away. So the reason why we chose water was not necessarily because of abundant knowledge in water purification. It was because we wanted to address the community needs. And at that point, once we learned, okay, this is what our community needs, we collaborated with other nonprofits that have engineers and scientists and worked with them and the community to build a system that made sense for our community. So basically, I'm an advocate, I'm a community mobilizer, spoke with the community, hey, what's going on? What's your most pressing need? Found out that it was water, and then proceeded to use my skill set to collaborate with an organization called 33 Buckets, as well as Drexel University. They were launching an aquaponic and water purification, like minor program for their environmental studies majors. So we collaborated with that university as well as 33 Buckets to build the water purification system and to build the aquaponic system. So I'm glad you asked that question. Ultimately, it came down to what makes the most sense for our community. And then at that point, it was evaluating what skills does our organization have to address this issue, and is it in our best interest to collaborate with other organizations that have skills that our organization does not. We collaborated, stuff happened. All right, I hope that answers your question. Okay, I'm going back to the chat. Let's see. Where did we get the financing for these projects? Great question. Thank you, Karen. So for both projects, actually, we used a two-prong approach in order to fundraise money. We did Kickstarter. We actually used Indiegogo. So we used the Indiegogo campaign, reached out to our networks, said, hey, this is what we're doing, join us. And then we also worked with two universities, Arizona State University, as well as Arcadia University, which is where I graduated from, to put together a service learning trip. And so we were able to get labor from the service learning trip and also additional funding to support the initiatives. So you're going to see a lot of patterns here: collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. The reason why we were able to successfully fundraise in such a short period of time is because members within our organization tapped into their already existing networks to say, hey, this is a project that I feel really passionate about. This is an organization that's doing wonderful things. And we were able to get the money. We were researching grants, but most grants, because our organization was really new at the time, most grants required that we be in existence for at least 5 years. And we obviously weren't. So we basically kept a file of those types of opportunities for the future when we were able to meet their time frame. But for those two initial projects, we fundraised. So anyone who does fundraising, you are super important to this cause of making the world a better place. We need your skills. Keep at it, keep honing them. All right, I see another question. So Maria, for the water project and how it helped the girls go to school, you noticed many other benefits too. Yes. Were those other benefits anticipated? Ooh, or yes, or were there serendipity? So I had studied sustainable development within my classes, so I anticipated some of the results. Like I knew that, okay, once the girls aren't walking 5-6 miles to fetch water, they're going to be able to go back to school. So I anticipated that. I also anticipated that people would not be as sick because they're not drinking contaminated drinking water. So I anticipated those, but some other effects that I had no idea were going to happen was going back to collaboration. It was amazing just to see how quickly the community mobilized once they were able to see, okay, so this project is, this organization is, you know, helping us do X, Y, and Z. While we were still conducting like our interviews, they gathered literally like every single person in the community into the church and said, hey, so this water purification system is working. what else do you have? These are our other issues. So one result is that it really energized the community, which I wasn't really expecting. I was just like, all right, we'll see what happens. We'll address this issue, and you know, we'll fingers crossed they like us and they don't want to kick us out, because we were a group of foreigners. I'm Dominican and Puerto Rican. I don't think I mentioned that, but I'm Dominican and Puerto Rican, hablo español, but I'm not from their community. I am still an outsider from their community. And the students that we brought in to help with our initiative were also outsiders. So there was the fear that they might be like, get out of here. Like, what are you doing? You don't know what's best for us. So that was one really cool unexpected result. There were others, but I can't think of them off the top of my head right now. Basically, once an organization is working with respect, in collaboration with the community, you really see the community show up. A lot of marginalized communities are disenfranchised, and they're so used to people going in there and telling them, this is what you need, blah, 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 and it not being symbiotic and mutual. So there's a lot of, like, these communities are kind of turned off. They're just like, you're just this outsider that doesn't know what our life is. So it was really cool to know that we were doing the work that we knew needed to be done in a respectful way, and that the community reciprocated and were really excited to continue to collaborate with us. I wasn't expecting that. I don't think any organization should expect the people that they are helping to all of a sudden be indebted to them and thank them. That's not why we do the work that we do, but I'm glad that that was something that happened. All right. All right, so the next question, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, Aixa Ritz. Great question. Am I sharing this knowledge and technology with other developing countries? So the good news is that a lot of organizations are becoming more knowledgeable about these technologies and are trying to implement it in their schools. The main challenge is that there's so many nonprofits out there. So I'm sharing it with this platform so that other organizations will know what's going on. But I also know that there is a huge gap. There's a lot of other organizations that would benefit from learning about the work that we're doing. All right, what made us choose the, let's see, 1 second. One moment. So basically, see, the local farmers, yes. So sorry, the next question that I see is, okay, I'm sorry, I missed Audrey's question. So why did you choose the Dominican Republic to start your sustainable development goals? Do you think that you can expand to more places? Great question. Thank you so much for asking that. So the reason why we started in the Dominican Republic is because that's where we had the most social capital. We basically had connections with the former president of the Dominican Republic. He promised us land, and then we were also able to collaborate with the senator of the region of Monte Plata. So because those connections, it made sense to work in the Dominican Republic. The other major reason was funding. We knew that the cost to implement these projects would be less if we did them in the Dominican Republic as opposed to trying to do it in the United States. So we knew that our timeline could be accelerated a little bit more than if we tried to implement that here, because of finances and also
for good reasons. But if we wanted to build a project like this in the Bronx, like we would need permission from the, there's so much red tape. We would need the zoning permits and all this stuff that I have no idea, because we haven't done it in the Bronx yet. But basically, there were a lot less gatekeepers in a way that we needed to address. As long as we had community buy-in, which we did, and we had the land, we were able to just move forward, which was really cool and not something that we would have been able to do had we worked in another area. And yes, the goal is to expand to more places. Our expansion is going to obviously change depending upon where we expand to. Like for example, composting, would only be appropriate on a seasonal basis in the United States, like in the northern part. So like if we were to build this in the Bronx, I keep saying the Bronx because I'm from the Bronx, but if we were to do this in the Bronx, we would have to rely on anaerobic digestion as opposed to solely on composting, for example, because we need to take the weather and climate into account. Another main difference with the expansion would be space. So instead of trying to build a school from scratch in an area where in an area like the Bronx where space is limited, what we would most likely do is work with already existing schools to help them become more sustainable by implementing a more sustainable curriculum, maybe helping them establish green roofs and things like that. So yes, the goal is to expand, but before doing so, a lot of research needs to be done. We also want to make sure that we have extensive contacts in the areas that we want to expand to, because it is a lot of work. So we want to make sure that we have community buy-in and the appropriate support, and also money. So it does unfortunately come down to money as well. Okay. I'm loving these questions, guys. I really appreciate it. So the next one is, I'm sorry again if I'm butchering your names. Demi, we have, do local farmers utilize this compost method here in the US? Yes, that's a good question. So it obviously depends on the farmer. There are farmers that do utilize composting, but unfortunately in the US, we use more of a monochromatic method, and a lot is done using pesticides and unhealthy fertilizers. It's why there's been such a movement to be able to label foods appropriately. Every brand all of a sudden wants to be natural, but what does natural actually mean? So there has been a rigorous process set in place that organizations can label their food as organic if they're employing these types of techniques. There's also been a lot of advocacy being pushed so that bills will be passed to label food that is GMO, genetically modified, as GMO. So it's complicated in the US because there are lobbyists that are pushing their agenda, and then we also have such a high population that we've been doing things a certain kind of way for so long. But there are areas with like pockets within our very diverse and large country where these techniques like composting and more natural methods are being used. I hope that answers your question. All right, and it is 2:12, so I'll answer a couple more. Let's see. You find. Okay, Larry, I'm skipping your question because I already answered it. Another student asked about the funding. So, okay, a question from Sasha about the iron deficiency. Did you notice as to whether there were other vitamin deficiencies apart from iron? So this is a really good question. Because of our community and we wanted to respect them, we weren't going out and administering like blood work. We were a more holistic organization, and our number one focus was not health. So we weren't in a position to go collect, you know, people's blood samples to test them for any other deficiencies. So basically it was mostly information that we received from our community. They were the ones sharing with us what their issues were. The good thing is that our community was very transparent. They are very typical like Latino community where they tell you everything. They don't have anything to hide. So that was one thing that we were able to use to our advantage. So they were the ones that really shared that the iron deficiency is a major issue. So we addressed it. And then also protein deficiency. We were able to observe the typical diet. And I was also kind of familiar with what the typical diet looked like, and we're able to assess deficiencies from there. Maybe down the line, it would be awesome for us to be able to collaborate with an organization like Partners in Health or the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to do a more comprehensive analysis of what vitamin deficiencies were present in the community to then be able to address them. But at the time, our major focus was to address the more general issues that everyone in the community identified verbally, which was access to the clean drinking water and the protein and iron deficiency. So I hope that answers that question. What are the first steps to doing your own compost? So fortunately, we live during a time where there is so much technology at our disposal, and YouTube is life. So there are tons of videos that will walk you through how to create your own compost. But basically, the way that I do mine, and I'm not perfect with my compost, I forget sometimes, my husband forgets all the time. So you'll see me sifting through the trash. So basically, it's good if you have your outdoor compost bin, if that is something that you have access to. And then you have like your inside kitchen compost. So I use like a stainless steel container with a lid. And that's where after like cooking, I put like my banana peels and apple cores and coffee grinds and fun things like that, put that in there. And then once that's full, I go and chuck it into my compost bin. The other main thing before you officially start your compost bin, I would highly recommend that maybe you buy one of those like big tubs and fill it up with like nitrogen type foods, because you're going to produce way more carbon waste than you are going to produce nitrogen. Take it from me. And then you're going to end up with really stinky compost. If you don't want to like piss off your roommate, you want to acquire as much nitrogen material as possible. And by nitrogen material, I mean newspaper, toilet paper rolls, dry grass clippings, dry leaves. And a lot of these videos let you know like what is carbon rich, what is nitrogen rich, and then you can orchestrate your little formula from there. So it takes a little finessing, but basically your rule is 1 to 3. So for every 1 part carbon, and by carbon I mean like your banana peels and all that fun, 3 parts nitrogen. So you want 3 times the amount of newspaper and all that fun stuff. Otherwise, again, it's not very happy with stinky compost. The other thing is to aerate it as much as possible to introduce that oxygen. Without oxygen, it's going to get like slimy and stinky. Another really good alternative for urban housing is worm compost. Worms are your friends. You just create a small little worm compost bin, you feed your worms, and it kind of accelerates the process there because you're not just using heat to accelerate the decomposition, you're using worms that are actually eating it, and then they create this like beautiful, super rich soil. So I would just Google like worm compost bins. On Amazon, you can also buy already like created ones that have, basically it's like a 2-tier system. The top tier is like where you like put your food and stuff, and then the worms come up and then they eat it and they're like, yeah, I'm happy, and then they go back down. So there are already existing systems that you can buy if you don't want to start from scratch, which I totally get, especially as a newbie. All right. And last question, yay. All right, not that I'm happy that questions are over, but I'm just glad I was able to get to all of them. Does compost only provide nutrients to plants? Can it provide some water? Can it provide some water to plants to help them get strong in drought? That's a great question. So in terms of addressing drought, compost is a great solution. You can't control how much rainfall there is, but what you can control is your soil conditions. So by using the technique of like composting, what you're doing is making sure that your soil is very rich in nutrients, so that even during times when there isn't as much abundance in water, at least your soil is still nitrogen rich. Another really important technique when dealing with drought is a permaculture concept called swells, SWELL. And basically what it is creating ridges in the soil so that it prevents erosion, because one of the major contributing factors to drought, other than inconsistent rainfall, is improper water management. So basically it's like runoff and erosion that happens when it rains, and then the nutrients isn't being retained in the soil. So by digging these swells, you're able to kind of hold the nutrients in the soil more naturally. Another, sorry, I can go on forever. Another way to address droughts is actually the aquaponic system that I mentioned. Basically, because the soil was so depleted and it still, takes a little bit of time to produce enough compost for the type of project that we wanted to scale, the aquaponic system is able to produce nutrients for the plants in the absence of a lot of like water. You don't need so much water to create the aquaponic system. And then it basically, the nutrients from the fish waste provides nutrients for the soil. So that's another really good method during times of drought. And then last but not least, greenhouses. I'm a huge fan of greenhouses and hoop houses when there are areas that there's just so much evaporation that's happening. Being able to kind of capture some of that really helps out. So I hope that answers everything. Thank you so much for all these awesome questions. Yes, Rotary clubs. That is a great option if you have connections with Rotary. Yes, I agree. Good stuff. Okay, so it is 3:21.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
I do want to share one more thing, if I may.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So I'm going to call out Isabella. And I kind of want to do a fun little exercise while in the 8 minutes that we have left.
Sure.
So I'm going to ask you a quick question. If you can address any world problem, what would it be?
I would definitely say world hunger. I know that is one of the major SDG goals. And like you mentioned with identifying that they needed clean drinking water, I feel like this is a similar issue that would kind of help to unfold and solve other issues after that is solved, if that makes sense.
Yes,
I think that's definitely a starting point goal, and that would be my number one.
All right, so again, in the 8 minutes that we have left, let's help Isabella address her goal. Based on my presentation and based on the things that you guys know, what are some techniques that maybe we can employ in order to address world hunger? I'm not going to jump in first. I'm going to let someone else type it in the chat.
Yes, please.
Based on what you think are some techniques that we can employ in order to address world hunger. And I say in the chat, as much as I would love to hear all of your lovely voices, it really puts a strain on the bandwidth and the connection. So this way we're able to hear from everyone without having to distort the connection. All right, you were all very participatory before, so let's see it. Let's address world hunger here. Ashley, you have anything? I'm gonna pick on you.
Yeah, sure. To assist with world hunger, I would suggest helping those in agriculture develop bringing farmers to other third world countries to teach them how to properly put together a farm and successfully run it, and using your sustainability resources as well.
Great. Yeah, definitely. And what I will say, I'm going to piggyback off that, Ashley,
Yeah,
and say that
absolutely.
oftentimes a lot of local farmers know the techniques, they just don't always have the resources.
Right.
So an organization like Heifer International, if anyone doesn't know about Heifer International, you should look them up like now. They have a beautiful model that addresses world hunger. So Isabella, this is your homework. Look up Heifer International if you don't know about them already. Basically what they do is they provide individuals with agricultural resources. So they might give someone a cow if that's what's appropriate. They might give someone a sheep or access to a beehive. And
That's
then
great.
basically they train them to manage whatever livestock or technology they basically gave to this organization. And then they have a give forward model. So when your cow has a baby, you give it to someone else in the community. When with your beehive, you're able to use the beehive to make honey, and that is a method of addressing, economic issues. And then you're also giving bees and butterflies a home, because we are endangered right now because of pesticides. So you're also addressing that environmental issue, and then it's spreading on a community level because you're giving back. You're able to cultivate bees and then cultivate more and then give out other bee hives to other members in the community. And Heifer International does a really good job at researching what is culturally appropriate for the area. So they're not going to give, someone a cow in an area where there isn't enough like grass to feed the cow. You know what I mean? They're not going to give someone a cow in Antarctica, definitely look into Heifer International. All right, what else we got? How else can we address world hunger? We have 4 more minutes.
I believe someone said something in the chat.
I like Cassandra. Yes, I do. So Cassandra said, look for partners with a solid track record to possibly leverage a comprehensive grant application. Yes, definitely. We need money in order to address food insecurity. So in order to, by collaborating and leveraging already existing networks and opportunities, we're able to come closer to our goal. Awesome. So another is, I'm gonna go ahead and give you a little bit more homework. Look into permaculture concepts. One of the number one priorities of permaculture is to create enough food for this next 7 generations. So their principles are actually used to produce as much food as possible in as little space as possible with as little resources as possible. And some of the concepts that they talk about, which I'll share very briefly, is doing the opposite of what we do here in the US. They actually, one of the major principles is integrating as opposed to segregating, and planting crops that are symbiotic to each other, as opposed to what we do here in the US, which is we have fields upon fields of corn, and then we have fields upon fields of soy. What happens if there's a disease that hits the soy? They're all gone. Same thing with the corn. It's what we saw during the potato famine years ago. So growing crops in diverse ways enables them to be resilient. Because let's say you're planting legumes and pumpkin and rice. If something targets the rice, you're only losing that one crop, but you still have all your other crops to rely on. So working with organizations to help them employ permaculture principles that have been studied to be really effective is another good way to work with there's permaculture guilds out there, so it'd be really cool like to collaborate with those existing networks because they really know their stuff. All right, 2 more minutes. Anything else? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Ooh, what about raised garden beds? Yes. Thank you, Demi. So sorry, I'm a slam poet on the side, so that's why I do this. Yes, raised beds and the use of drip systems. That is so important, especially in areas where the soil has been degraded. Another really cool advantage to using raised beds, which I learned when in my gardening days, is you can turn raised beds into hoop houses. So you can take like a flexible PVC pipe, basically like put it on each side. So like think of a square. So you put the little hoop on top and then like tape it down with plastic, and it creates like a little tiny greenhouse. Oh. So I was working with a nonprofit here in Philadelphia, where I live, and they were able to install these hoop houses, and their crops were able to survive until November. So it was like snowing and it was so cold out, but they were still able to reap from the hoop houses. So that's another really cool reason why raised beds are awesome. And yes, drip systems. We don't, the crops can use green catchment. They can, so follow garden answer. All right, yes, we have been instructed by Demi. That is part of what we need to do. Thank you for that resource. Garden answer. And look, 3:30. Yay. So look, we helped you start to conceptualize how you are going to address world hunger now. Go off and change the world.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. A big thank you to Alyssa and Isabella. Alyssa, this was so informative, and I know myself, I've learned a lot. I hope, based on all the questions, it looks like everybody was very interested and intrigued as well. And I think now you got everybody's minds going and thinking. So again, this video has been recorded and it will be posted on FDU's Office of Global Learning YouTube page. So if you register today, I will send you a link after this event with some additional resources and information. So feel free to, if you have any questions, additional questions for Alyssa, feel free to reach out to me as well, and I'll get them answered for her. And again, feel free to reach out to me, and thank you all so much for attending. Oh, we're still going.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ashley and Larry, for organizing.
Bye everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.